Hi everybody, my name is Micah. I have been silently stalking these channels for the last few weeks, but haven't really had any opportunity to contribute yet because my life is hectic right now. We just moved my family after 12 years in Texas. We moved my family from Texas to Colorado Springs. So we're supposed to close on a house next week, and life has been crazy. I'm actually traveling right now for work and am in an airport. So if you hear any announcements overhead, you probably will hear at least one announcement while I'm sharing. But Dale asked me to share a little bit about my work that I do with startup founders and their teams. I am an ICF certified coach, a Gallup certified strengths coach, and a trained facilitator. So I kind of do two different jobs as a coach. One is one-on-one coaching with startup founders and oftentimes their leadership teams. And then I also do larger facilitated workshops with whole teams. So I'll actually have everybody take the Clifton Strengths Assessment. If you're not familiar with it, I'll talk a little bit about it when I get into the details, but I'll have everybody take the Clifton Strengths. There's an announcement. I'll have everybody take the Clifton Strengths Assessment from a team, and then I'll come facilitate a half-day workshop where we'll talk about what do these strengths mean and how do we understand one another better to increase communication, collaboration, and better working relationships. So that's what I'm going to spend. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes sharing some of my experience working with that tool. I'll give you some background into where that tool came from and how to use it effectively. So I'll catch you in the next video. Okay, let's talk about the Clifton Strengths Assessment. So I know that a handful of you I've already worked with before, a few of you that are in this group, I've worked with before, and so you've already heard some of these things from me, but it never hurts to get a refresher. So consider this your refresher if you have heard this before, but also for those of you who may have heard of the Clifton Strengths Assessment in the past. It used to be called the Strengths Finder tool, and it was created by Gallup. Some of these things you may have thought you learned because you've taken the assessment before, but you'd be surprised how many people I work with who have heard of the assessment or have even taken it before, but when I ask them what their strengths are, they don't really remember and they never really learned how to use it. And so that's kind of something that I take pride in that I help people figure out how to take something that's conceptual and interesting like this, but make it practical and applicable to their work and to their goals. So what I've been doing, well, let me give you some background on the Clifton Strengths. So Don Clifton is the name of the man who developed the Clifton Strengths Assessment and did all of the research, or at least started all of the research that went into the Clifton Strengths Assessment. It was back in the 50s that he started doing this. He was known for saying, what if we studied what's right with people instead of focusing on what's wrong with them? And that was the premise of all of his research, because at the time, everybody who was studying and publishing work on personal development or professional development, they were all talking about weaknesses. How do we address our weaknesses to become well-rounded? How do we address the things that we're not strong at so that we can be well-rounded is really the term that most people use, as if that's something to aspire to. And I think even still today, it's a pervasive notion that we should be becoming well-rounded people. Don Clifton kind of flipped that on its head, because over decades of research, he found that the people who were the most successful in their field didn't focus on their weaknesses. They actually focused on their areas of strength. So our areas of strength are where we have the most potential for improvement or potential for excellence. And that's what he found time and time again from his research, that these people who were the best in their field only focused on their areas of talent and became world class in those things. And they knew their weaknesses too. They were aware of where they were weak, but they surrounded themselves with other people who were a complement to their strengths. So they found people whose strengths were in areas that they had weaknesses, and they continued to develop in the areas where they were strong. So what this did, the reason this kind of flipped it on its head, is that in the weakness-based development world, what we're doing by making everybody well-rounded is that we're creating a team full of people where everybody is decent at everything, but we don't invest in making anybody excellent at anything, because if they're already good at something, we don't focus on that anymore. We have them work on one of their weaknesses. You know how when your phone tells you that your battery is down to 20%, that it stops you in the middle of your volley? That's what just happened. So what I was trying to say is that when we're trying to build a weakness-based team where everybody's working on their weaknesses, we're creating a team full of people where everybody is decent at everything, but nobody has an opportunity to be excellent at anything. A strengths-based team where we let people focus on their areas of talent and do work that's aligned with their areas of talent, we're creating a team where nobody is good at everything, but everybody is excellent at something. And so the performance of the team on average goes from mediocre to excellent, not because any one person is excellent at everything, but because we can rely on different people across the team to be excellent at different things. And so together as a team, we're stronger. This is a concept that I use a lot in the coaching that I do with startup founders as we talk about their teams. So there are 34 strengths that came out of the research. When you take the Clifton Strengths Assessment, if you haven't taken it already, when you take it, get the full 34 assessment. They give you two options. Gallup will give you the cheaper option, which is $20, and you can just get your top 5. That's not enough, not for this group. That's okay when you're doing like a whole team workshop and there are a bunch of individual contributors, and it gets expensive when you buy everybody the full report. The full report is $50. But you see all of your strengths from 1 to 34, your top being the thing that comes most natural to you, and the bottom being the things that don't come as naturally to you. So I recommend that for everybody in this group. If you haven't taken it already, take the full 34 Clifton Strengths Assessment. Now, what you're looking for as a startup founder, or at least some insights that I have gained from working with founders, is one concept called leadership identity. I have a podcast that I started with Scott Paul where we interview startup founders and we have them take the Clifton Strengths Assessment first. The podcast is called Founder DNA. And then we talk about their journey in entrepreneurship, but then we also talk about some of their strengths. And the idea behind this podcast is that there isn't a single recipe for what makes a successful startup founder. Many different founders with very different strengths have learned how to be a successful founder, and we don't need to look like everybody else. And so what I do with founders is we look at their strengths and we talk about, what does leadership look like for me? What does being a founder and CEO look like for me? Or if you're not actually a founder, but you're an executive or you're an entrepreneur and you're a solopreneur, that still applies to you. That you don't have to look like everybody else that you see around you who's an entrepreneur or a founder. So what does entrepreneurship and leadership look like for someone with my strengths is a question that I have people reflect on and that we actually talk about in the one-on-one coaching that I use with founders. The other thing that comes up a lot with founders that I don't think any of them expected to be a benefit of using the Clifton Strengths Assessment and using some of these strengths-based principles is that you can use this tool to understand your teams better, to put people in the right places to do work that aligns with their strengths, and you can learn to motivate people differently based on their strengths. And it's something that I'll have to give you an example because you wouldn't expect it to work, but it does. So there's a founder that I work with where I coach him and his leadership team of about 5 leaders twice a month. And we do one-on-one coaching, and we went through their strengths for the first 6 months or so. And it was just talking about like, who are you? What's your leadership style? How do you use your strengths to accomplish your goals and be a leader? And then we started to turn that to their teams. So they had their teams take the assessment. And now almost every time I meet with one of these leaders, they'll bring in the strengths report of one of their employees that they're having a hard time motivating or understanding, or maybe their performance is slipping and they can't really understand why. And so we'll talk about it, what might be going on based on this person's strengths. And then we use that as an input into their conversation with their people. So we do have to make some assumptions about what might be going on with some of their employees, but it's a good starting point to get out of their own head and think about how other people think. So one of the conversations I had with one of these leaders was based on this employee who was on a trajectory where they were doing great for months, and they promoted this person, and then they started to see their performance slip. And as we were talking about this person's strengths, one stuck out to me that was kind of surprising, and it was a strength called belief. And people with the belief strength need to feel like they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. They need to know that it's purpose driven, what they're actually doing, and that it aligns with their values. I want to know that I'm doing something worthwhile, and I wouldn't work well in a company where I don't believe in the mission or I don't believe in what they stand for. When I looked at the whole leadership team's strengths, none of the leaders had high belief, and yet this one employee did. And when we talked about that, we realized that this company didn't really have a mission and vision. It was more about we're going to let everybody work hard. We're going to compensate them really well, and we're going to give them good experience that sets them up for a really great career. But it wasn't about mission and vision. And that's okay. Not all companies need that, but some employees need that. Some people need to know that there's a mission and a vision and something that they stand for as they contribute to their work. And so I worked with this leader to figure out how to have some conversations with this employee that would resonate with them, how their work is contributing to something meaningful and purpose-driven. So we use this tool as a way both for the individual, the leader, to understand their leadership identity, but also for the team to be a higher performing team, to have greater tolerance for one another, where you give people the benefit of the doubt when they have different strengths than you and they think differently than you, and to have an attitude about that being okay. That I don't need everybody else around me to look like me, think like me, or feel like me. In fact, it's better, there's more diversity of thought when people do see the world differently. And the beauty of a tool like the Clifton Strengths Assessment there are a couple of things that come to mind, but a lot of people struggle with the idea of being put in a box. I don't want to take your assessment because you're just going to stereotype me and put me in this category. And that's a little bit true in that we do put some of the strengths, or we apply some of the strengths to explain where somebody might be coming from or how they might think, feel, or behave. But the reality is that we want the people that are taking the assessment to have words to explain things about themselves that they've always known. We're not telling you anything that you didn't already know about yourself, but it's things that you've always known, but you either didn't know how to explain or you didn't realize it needed to be explained. And that happens every time I do a workshop with teams. We'll start putting words to these things that are true about people, and they'll have these aha moments, or they'll hear a description about somebody else's strength and they'll be like, oh my gosh, that is so you. And I never realized that was a thing before, or that's so me. And I never realized that I needed to explain that to people. But now we have a common language where we can explain these things about ourselves that we've always known to be true, but that we didn't really realize could be explained or needed to be explained. So there's a lot of power in having a common language and understanding from the same tool what makes us unique from one another, and how to partner with one another to make things, or to make our work more productive, to bring our performance as a team to a higher level and make a high performing team. Okay, I think my time is about up, so I'm going to stop here and invite any of you who have thoughts that occurred to you as you were listening to me, or questions that occurred to you as you were listening to me. I left out a bunch of principles that are really valuable and really important to strengths-based development and leadership, and especially to you as founders and entrepreneurs, that I'd love to hear your questions and be able to answer those just with whatever time we have remaining. So feel free to leave me some questions and comments, and would love to hear everybody's thoughts.